Today, as part of today's ceremony, I want to invite our special guests, Marsha and Matsumoto of the Watsonville Japanese American Citizens League, the JACL, to lead us in today's pledge of allegiance.
To all those who serve in the military of the United States, the hand salute is appropriate. Salute. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Today, Monterey County Board of Supervisors, along with our Dean Office of Civil Rights, remembers the 76th anniversary of the infamous Executive Order 9066 by President Franklin D. Roosevelt on February 19, 1942, that ordered the unjust internment of over 120,000 Japanese and Japanese Americans. Many don't know that this order also included internment of about an additional 11,000 people of German and Italian ancestry. We are honored this morning to hold a special apology ceremony to the Japanese American community of the Monterey Bay area that is decades long overdue. To start, we have a special presentation by our local historian extraordinaire and Professor Emeritus Sandy Leiden, who authored the book, The Japanese in the Monterey Bay Region, which I provided copies to all the supervisors, our CAO, and our county council. Following his presentation, we will also have a brief 3-minute slideshow presentation and then a special presentation to several honored guests that are with us here today. I'd like to invite Sandy Leiden to please come to the podium. And while he gets ready, I want to make a few special acknowledgments today. I believe today we also have with us Regina May, the president of the NAACP of Monterey County. Is Regina here? Yes, we can give a round of applause, everyone. Regina May. And I know that also our Salinas Valley Roulette was trying to send a representative to us. They're running late this morning. Also, we have our new county civil rights officer, Juan Rodriguez. Juan, thank you for joining us today as well. And everyone, we are very honored to also have high school students from all 4 high schools in Salinas, from Alisal, North Salinas, Everett Alvarez, Salinas High School, to witness today's event. And I want to thank the Salinas Union High School District and Superintendent Dan Burns for allowing the students to join us today. Please give them a round of applause. Mayor Gunter, is he able to join us today? You might be running late. Okay, thank you. Now we'll pass it on to Dr. Solaya. Thank you for joining us today.
So, Supervisor Alejo, you have learned something over the time from your teachers. Were you ever a student of Mr. Matsumoto?
Mas was my mom's high school teacher, and Marshall was my brother's kindergarten teacher. And you were my teacher at Cabrillo College.
So, because you also took a class from me at Cabrillo, which obviously has done you well. Well, look at him. I mean, he's running the show at the moment. That's very cool. It's an honor to be here, sir. It's an honor to be here with the supervisors and with the assembled members of not only the Japanese American Citizens League, but also the wider Japanese community. We need to do a little bit of terminology work. You know, I'm a teacher. I can't help myself. The term Nikkei, which would be spelled in Roman characters, Nikkei, is the term that we use for the entire Japanese community. That is, both citizens and also Japanese citizens. It's a collective term, and it's used, I think, well, because often there's confusion when you say Japanese community in 1942, that also involved people who were not citizens. So Nikkei is a collective. Then the immigrant sequence is the Issei, which is the first generation, the immigrants from Japan. Their children, which are Nisei, these are just counters. Issei, Nisei, Sansei, Yonsei. And one of my Japanese teachers here, Yoko Umeda, I'm trying to pronounce everything correctly so I don't get in trouble later on. need to understand is where the community came from. Who were the people that were, in 1942, arrested and taken away to the Salinas Rodeo grounds and then ultimately to concentration camps, most of them at Poston, Arizona. That community was a result of about 50 years of evolution here. The primary immigrant period is from about 1898 to 1924. And what happened, they were brought here and then came here to replace the Chinese who had been excluded from coming to the United States in 1882. We have a long history of excluding and oppressing immigrant peoples. And the Chinese were the first in 1882 to be actually totally excluded from coming to the United States. And I will note that Supervisor Alejo sponsored legislation at the state level to give an apology to the Chinese community for the treatment that they received in California. And that was a wonderful thing. It's a really, really cool thing. So they came and worked in agriculture, and that's one of the reasons that image is up. And so there's two economic fronts here for them. One was ag, and the other was fishing. 90% of the fishing fleet for Cannery Row before World War II was Japanese, which is something that most people don't know. They assumed that it was Sicilian, but it wasn't. The Japanese were great fishermen, and they were great farmers. And so they moved into agriculture, and they were the farm laborers in the beginning. But they preferred to work for themselves, and organized quickly, and began to buy property, and began to compete with the majority farm owners in this area in California. So starting early on, the community begins to get handicapped by laws, regulations, not only immigration regulations, but also land law. In 1913, California passed the Alien Land Law, which made that if you could not become a naturalized citizen, you couldn't own property in California. And I need to just hit this hard. Japanese immigrants could not become naturalized citizens. So they were aliens in the United States forever. They couldn't naturalize. Their children, however, by American law, which we all know now, and it always comes up regularly, by birth, were American citizens. So the Issei, the second generation are American citizens. The Issei are technically aliens, Japanese aliens. They couldn't become citizens, and yet they're going to be blamed for being separate. In other words, they're not allowed, in many ways, to become part of what we would call the mainstream. And yet later on, in a minute, when after Pearl Harbor, they're going to be focused. The focus is going to be on them because they weren't in the mainstream. Well, they weren't allowed to get into the mainstream. But it didn't matter. They worked. You know, there's a stereotype, but it's true. They worked hard. They worked hard for 50 years. They worked hard to acquire, as best they could, the American dream. Now, their kids, those Issei, started to go to high school students like we have right here, and they, in a civics class, learned about the Constitution. So, as things get a little bit tighter, as the international events begin to press, they began to reassure the Japanese parents that they didn't have anything to worry about, that the Constitution won't permit the kinds of things that people are starting to talk about. The anti-Japanese movement starts in 1905, organized in California, and it is relentless, leading up to 1924, when Japanese were excluded from coming to the United States. This is a huge moment. It's a huge moment in Japan. On June 1st, 1924, the Japanese government held a national humiliation day where all the Japanese people came out and they felt humiliated by what America had done by excluding them from coming to the United States. The other characteristic you need to keep in mind is that by virtue of an immigration law which wasn't really supposed to do what it did, but it did, in 1906, 1907, Japanese women, wives, could join their husbands here, but more laborers weren't allowed to come, and the Japanese government controlled it very tightly. The Japanese, by 1920, are almost even up male-female in their populations. In contrast, for example, the Chinese never got over 90% male, 10% female at best, which meant that there were children, marriages, children, citizens who went to school and learned the Constitution and thought that nothing can happen. International events begin to squeeze down. And it's very clear that the United States and Japan are on a collision course. There's embargoes, and then Japan will attack China in 1937. So we've got international things working, and that's a really important part of this story. The Japanese here had nothing to do with any of that. It's perception. The American public, the perception of the majority of the people in America were that the Japanese community was connected to Japan, but it wasn't. And this is, of course, what's going to cause the problem. So the images that I'm showing, this actually happens to be over in San Juan, over in the San Juan Valley. I did that because of my the San Benito County JACL. Kurt Kurosaki is here, and I kind of thought it might be. So I wanted to make sure that the San Juan Bautista people got their cut. But this is ag, and notice that there's children in the photograph. Javier, by the way, is my remote. We didn't really decide on a signal, except that I'm going to put my finger up this one. This is the fishing representation. This is the Japanese abalone divers over at Point Lobos. This picture was taken around 1905. And we go next. This is at Oak Grove School, which, as some of you know, is out by Natividad. This is a Japanese school. And look at the children. Look at all the kids in this photograph. And these kids, this picture was taken probably in the 20s. These kids, many of them went to high school, got involved in student government, played football, ran track, so that they became part of the mainstream of America. All right, next. Well, you probably can't see that far, but this is part of the racism that came alongside them and that they had to deal with every day, all the time. This was the campaign of James D. Phelan, who was running for the Senate at the time. And you notice, if you can see it, you can see that there's a hand with the American flag on the cuff stopping what they called the Japanese invasion, which results in an exclusion in 1924. Yeah. Now here's the moment. December 7th, 1941, which was no surprise to people who were paying attention. The attack itself was a surprise, but the fact that the United States and Japan were at war was not a surprise. The federal government was on this from the beginning. It actually had been for decades. The night of December 7th, 1941, 1,500 Japanese leaders, Buddhist priests, all kinds of people, leadership in the community, were arrested. You can't arrest a whole bunch of people, hours away after an attack if you haven't been working on it ahead of time. And they were working on it ahead of time. The next day, the bank accounts for the Issei were frozen. They couldn't have access to their banks. The next day, 2 days later at the Pearl Harbor, the Nisei bank accounts were frozen. So the community almost instantly is being grabbed by the federal government. The major agents in this is the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the CID, with the cooperation of local law enforcement, the Attorney Generals, the Sheriff of Monterey County, were assisting the FBI to make it possible to clamp down. The border was closed, they couldn't leave the country, and they're finding their world just confining and narrow. So the question I always get from people is, where were the fair-minded people at this point? Why didn't somebody stand up and say something about all of this that was happening to the Japanese? And I've interviewed hundreds of people, both inside and outside the community, and the answer I get from most of the non-Japanese is, they said, we were worried about ourselves. The war was started. We didn't know what was happening. I call it the night of the kitchen table meeting. Every family seems to have had a meeting at the kitchen table on the night of December 7th. And as everybody was worrying about themselves, they didn't pay any attention to the Constitution and all the other stuff that they should have been paying more attention to, obviously. Next. Tough map. This is February 24th, 1942. The federal government draws a line around the bay, and it was Highway 1. Anybody who was an enemy alien, and that includes Italian aliens, German aliens, and Japanese Issei, had to move inside the highway. So you had to be inland from Highway 1. That meant that the community of Castroville, Highway 1 went right through Castroville. So one side of the main street of Castroville was inside, and the other was outside. And that happened all along the coast. That was the beginning of the movement of trying to, isolate the community. Next. This is the general of the Western Defense Command. This is General John DeWitt. And he was pretty much the architect and did most of the heavy lifting, and is responsible for saying a lot of very unfortunate things about the Japanese community, of which I will not repeat. There is a diminutive form of the word Japanese that's 3 letters long, and it was used extensively during World War II. As hard as, even quoting things, it's hard for me to say that word, so I'm not going to say it. You can put a J and then two dots for the ellipses, and know what I'm saying. He said, Japanese is always a Japanese, no matter if they're citizens or not. And you can use the short word of the short term reward for that, for what he actually said. Next. Okay, so now we're getting down to it. Here's the map that the Defense Command put together. This is Salinas, and you can see the big green circle around it, and this is going to be the radius of the area that the Salinas Rodeo Ground will be the temporary detention center where the people are going to be assembled. Next. This is an aerial picture of the Salinas Rodeo Ground, and if you know Salinas at all, you've got the highway over here on the left. That's Highway 101. And there's the grandstands in the middle. And you can see the buildings, the outbuildings. Those outbuildings were, many of them were horse stalls. They were cleared of the horses. The barbed wire was put up around the perimeter. And this will be used for the place where almost 4,000 Japanese and Japanese Americans will be interned. Next. The posters go up and describing who has to go, and of course the government didn't have the nerve to say what was really happening. So on those posters it says aliens and non-aliens. And what might a non-alien be? It's a citizen. They didn't have the courage to put the word U.S. citizen on the poster as to who had to go. Next. This is in the Armory, the National Guard Armory here in Salinas, as the assembled community is beginning to get their instructions about what they can bring, where they're going to have to go. This is a preliminary assembly meeting. Next. This is actually on the steps of the Salinas National Guard Armory. A family there with a rather ironic United States military recruiting poster on the other side of it. Some of these photographs you can't make out. All right. And Moss passes out the tags. You can see the tag on the young man. Kids, everybody had to go. Next. So they loaded them on buses, this is in Salinas, to take them to the rodeo grounds for the beginning of their incarceration. Next. This is an overview of the rodeo grounds, and you can see the luggage that they brought in the moving vans. They're all in front, and then the barracks in the back. Next. Some of you may remember, this is now a historic photograph. This is what the rodeo grounds used to look like. Next. And this is a photograph that I took from the top of the old rodeo grounds, looking down on that same view that you saw back there. Next. So 3 different times, 3 different executive orders will feed toward the Salinas rodeo grounds. And by May of 1942, there's about 4,000 people, some of whom are in this room. I know we're going to hear from them next. Unless you really misunderstand what's happening here, this is serious business. And as one person pointed out, they said, well, we put them all away to protect them from all of us. Well, no. You see, the machine guns were pointed in. They weren't pointed out. This was a prison at the Salinas rodeo ground. And so I'm next, because I'm going to skip forward here. In 1984, see, the important part of the JACL people that are here, you need to know. They're committed to see to it that this kind of activity never happens to anybody else in the United States. That we don't round up people because of what they look like and imprison them or exclude them. In 1984, the assembled Japanese American Citizens League put up a plaque. The plaque is out there by the rodeo grounds. Every February, this is the month, they have a day of remembrance where they go out and remember their being in prison. And if you can read, you can't read that far. I can barely even see it. They're committed that this should never happen again. Now, this story, by July 4th, 1942, the occupants of the assembly at Salinas were taken away on trains. Most of them posted in Arizona, and there were no more Japanese living in Monterey County. The story of their return, I'm going to leave to others, but I will say to you that the return was tough, and particularly tough San Juan Bautista and Salinas. And in both those places, there were incidents that happened in the Pacific Theater that colored people's perceptions about the Japanese. The Japanese have never been able to separate themselves, no matter how hard they work, from things involving Japan itself. And when Mas Hashimoto, who was in this camp at Salinas as a young boy, stands up and leads the Pledge of Allegiance, you need to understand just how important that is, how remarkable that is. Thank you.
I really thank Sandy Lyman for all his lifetime of work to educate many of our local residents about the amazing local history of the Monterey Bay area and its residents. And we thank you, Sandy, for being here for your presentation. Next, before we go on to our special our apology presentation, we have a 3-minute slide show that I made in last year's 75th anniversary of Executive Order 9066. The song playing is a traditional Japanese children's song called Furu Sato, which means my hometown. About 80% of the images are from the local scenes in Salinas, Watsonville, the Salinas Armory, the Salinas Rodeo Grounds, and the Potsdam Relocation Center, where most of our local residents were in prison. I just want to highlight, point out that there's one photo that's highlighted in yellow. That is of a young boy named Ralph Lazo, who was the only Mexican-American, non-Japanese, who voluntarily relocated to a relocation center. When he learned that his Japanese-American friends and neighbors were being relocated to were being relocated to the Manzanar Relocation Center in May 1942 in Los Angeles. He volunteered to go with them, and the Manzanar officials never asked about his ancestry. In 1944, he was elected class president of his high school class at Manzanar, and after high school, he joined the United States Army and served during World War II and was decorated with the Bronze Star. And so we can start that. You can start from the Chair of the Board of Supervisors, I want to thank all of you for joining us for this special occasion. As we all know, beginning in 1942, 3,586 Monterey Bay residents of Japanese ancestry, non-citizen aliens, and American citizens alike were ordered to report to the civilian control stations with only what they could carry. They not only lost their liberty, they also lost their homes, their businesses, and farms without charges, trial, legal counsel, or the establishment of guilt. High school students who were set to graduate were deprived of their graduation ceremonies when they were able to walk across the stage in front of their families or with their fellow classmates. Just 2 blocks from here, if you were to walk outside this building and to the left, toward the post office, the Salinas Armory, which is now the Powell Building on 100 Howard Street, in late March 1942 became the wartime civilian Control Agency Assembly Center. A month later, the larger Rodeo grounds became the Salinas Assembly Center, where the over 3,500 residents were interned from April to July 1942 before being sent on trains to the Poston Relocation Center in the harsh Arizona desert in La Paz County. Nearly 18,000 Japanese and Japanese Americans were interned at Poston, but there were 9 other such relocation centers throughout the country. On April 12, 1943, when federal officials considered releasing Japanese and Japanese Americans from these internment camps, the Monterey County Board of Supervisors, in response to local attitudes and emotions, passed a resolution protesting the release. A few days ago, with the help of our board clerks that are sitting in front of me, Sally and Irasema, we were able to find the original 1943 resolution and we were stunned to read its hurtful words of prejudice against our Japanese American families at that time. I just want to show you, this is the original 1943 resolution, and we'll put it out here for the public to be able to see, but it's in these large archival books. But we also put copies in the back of outside the lobby for the public to be able to read its original language. On February 19, 2002, the Board of Supervisors rescinded the 1943 resolution, but a formal apology was not offered to the Japanese American community at that time. Today, 75 years after the board approved that 1943 resolution, we will now make a formal apology to our Japanese American brothers and sisters, and we'll take up item number 5 out of order. I will first just read the last 3 paragraphs of this resolution we are considering approving today. Whereas Monterey County will forever regret the way its residents of Japanese descent were treated with the loss of their rights, property, and civic standing. And now therefore be it resolved on the occasion of the 76th anniversary of the signing of Executive Order 9066, this Board of Supervisors, on behalf of the residents of Monterey County, we hereby issue a formal apology to the Japanese American community of Monterey County and to the Japanese American Citizens League chapters, JACL, of Salinas Valley, Monterey Peninsula, and Watsonville for the county's official actions during that period, and for the unjust treatment of our neighbors of Japanese descent and the humiliation and financial losses they suffered, and thereby urge local schools, public agencies, and the residents of Monterey County to learn about the mistakes and the unwarranted fear spawned during that period and that resulted in Executive Order 9066, so that we will never forget and never fail to protect our fellow citizens and neighbors if those circumstances rise again. I would now like to make a motion to approve of this apology resolution, and is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Supervisor Salinas. Now, is there any comments or discussion from my colleagues on the board? Seeing none, is there any comments from the public on this resolution? All those in favor? Aye. Motion carries unanimously. If we give a round of applause, everyone. Now we'll come to the front to make the presentation of copies of these apology resolutions to our special guest. Thank you, everyone. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said that the time is always right to do what is right. Our apology today aims to partially turn a civil wrong into a right and to also educate our community and our younger generations about what occurred locally to our own neighbors and fellow Americans during a difficult period in our nation's history. It also reminds us today that during these challenging times that we must never forget the lessons of the past, or else we may be bound to repeat them as a nation in the future. Today, it is my honor to present a copy of today's apology resolution to some amazing local community leaders of the Japanese American community. I'm going to present each one individually, and then at the end we will take a group photo with all my colleagues on the Board of Supervisors. Each person that we're presenting to will then have a few minutes to share a few words. After they speak and take the photo, we'll have some words from my colleagues in the dais. First of all, I want to invite Jim Tashiro, the president of the Salinas Valley Japanese American Citizens League. He was also a high school student and also a UC Berkeley graduate, and his family were longtime fresh cut flower growers here in the beautiful Salinas Valley. Thank you. Are you presenting the same time? Okay, thank you very much. And we got a resolution. So on behalf of my colleagues on the Board of Supervisors, we want to present you with this apology resolution to the JACL and to the Japanese American community.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Alejo and the Monterey County Board of Supervisors. Unfortunately, our president of the Salinas Valley JACL was unable to be here today, but he sends a sincere appreciation for this recognition and resolution. My family wasn't directly involved or affected by the internment. However, I know of many families and friends in the Salinas Valley that have been. I know they will appreciate this award. So on behalf of the Salinas Valley JACL and all the families that were incarcerated, I need to accept this award. Thank you.
Next, we are very honored to have two additional very special guests of our community. First of all, Larry Oda and Jeff Uchida. Larry Oda is the past national president of the Japanese American Citizens League and the current board member of the Monterey Peninsula Japanese American Citizens League. Mr. Oda was born in a Department of Justice DOJ internment camp in Crystal City, Texas. His mother was interned at the Boston Relocation Center, and his father was interned at the Lordsburg Men's Internment POW camp in New Mexico. Jeff Uchida is the president of the Monterey Peninsula JACL chapter, and his parents and grandparents were interned at the Boston Relocation Center and the Hard Mountain War Relocation Center in Wyoming. We want to invite them up. We want to present Monterey Peninsula chapter of the JACL with this resolution apologizing for the board past actions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is quite an honor to be here. These words, if we look at the original document, there was some terrible language. And I'm sure with this resolution today, that will heal some of the wounds that were created back then. So we are very thankful for this opportunity to bring this out to the open. And it's really unfortunate to see young people learning the story. So let this never happen again.
Thank you. So one of the things that we tried hard to do was to make sure that this never happened again. And the current rhetoric coming out of Washington to limit immigration, the talk of building a wall is exactly the kind of things that we try to eliminate, you know, because of our experience that this wasn't the right thing to do, and it's still not the right thing to do. So hopefully with this resolution we have more ammunition to say, listen, remember what happened in 1942, it was wrong then, it's wrong now. So thank you very much.
Next, I'm also very honored to recognize two amazing leaders from my hometown of Watsonville. We have the current president and past president of the Watsonville Santa Cruz Japanese American Citizens League chapter. First, we have the honor to have here Mas Hashimoto, who was interned at the Salinas Family Center or the Boston Relocation Center as a 6-year-old child, along with his entire family. Marsha Hashimoto's parents and family were all interned at the Granada War Relocation Center in Amatchi, Colorado. We want to invite them both up to come and share some words as well. We give them a round of applause. I apologize to present this apology resolution to the Watsonville JACL chapter. There's also many of the Watsonville residents were brought here to Salinas and eventually to Boston. So we want to thank you for a lifetime of work to educate the community and our young people about what happened during that sad chapter in Regina May.
Thank you so much, Chairman Alejo, and to the supervisors of Monterey County. This means a great deal to our Japanese American community. I know when the Civil Liberties Act was passed, what made an impact on our community was the apology. And when the apology was presented to our community, it gave us a voice. It told us that you are not at fault, that the government was at fault, and now you may tell your story. And so that was a great moment of freedom in having our families finally express to their younger generation, their family, what had happened to them during World War II. So I know for my family and for the Japanese American community, the apology is a tremendous part of healing for our community. So thank you so much for this gracious resolution. We sincerely appreciate it. Thank you.
Forgive me, but I have to write mine down. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, of the supervisors, thank you for this formal apology, the first in the nation by a local government agency. My name is Matsumoto of Watsonville, and my POW, prisoner of war number, is 12524. That was for the family on the letter D. At age 6, I was incarcerated in the Salinas Assembly Center with my family on April 27, 1942. Later, we were shipped off to Poston, Arizona. At the Salinas Assembly Center, my older brother, Noriyuki, age 14 and a freshman at Watsonville High School, was accidentally killed while playing baseball. We had his funeral, cremated his body, left it at a mortuary here, and after the war, one of the first things we did was come here to Salinas to pick up my brother's ashes for burial in Watsonville. There were 120,000 innocent persons of Japanese ancestry living in the states of Washington, Oregon, and California who were incarcerated. There were 158,000 persons of Japanese ancestry living in the territory of Hawaii. It wasn't a state yet. With the exception of about 1,400, they were not incarcerated, and they were in the war zone. We were 2,500 miles away from the war zone. The Constitution ceased to exist for us. We were in prison without charges, attorney, trial, or due process of law. What happened to us was legal, right? It was legal. You can incarcerate without charges. The Supreme Court, in the Fred Korematsu case, a vote of 6-3, said yes, our incarceration was legal. Can it happen again? Yes. In 1944, it was declared by the court military necessity. Today, the term would be used national security. Any one of you may be in prison. It doesn't have to be a racial or ethnic group. It could be reporters of the newspapers, television. It can happen again. That's the fear. And we're so grateful to Monterey County Board of Supervisors for this resolution. We are so grateful. Thank you.
was your student. Wow, all right. Big impact. We have one more special guest, and another amazing story of courage and strength and resilience. Today we also have Gary Tanamura on behalf of his family, the Tanamura family, renowned for the Tanamura and Antelope farms here in the Salinas Valley, and Arizona, and other parts of the country. The family's parents, just imagine this, the parents, 5 sisters, 3 brothers were all interned at the Salinas Assembly Center and the Boston Relocation Center, while 2 brothers, Charlie and John Tanamura, served their country in the United States Army in Europe during World War II. While 2 sons were fighting in the war in Europe, their entire family was interned here in Salinas and later in Arizona. After their release, the family had to start their farms all over after losing everything they had. Today, it is an honor to have the son of Charlie Tanamura here with us, and I want to invite him to come up and receive this resolution. Please join me on I want to present this apology resolution to you and your family, and what an amazing story that I hope our young people will learn more about your entire family's story to restart or become one of the biggest agricultural companies in the country today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Supervisor Alejo, and also thank you very much for this resolution. I guess when I talked to Louis last week, he told me that we were going to have this, he was going to honor me today, and he wanted to kind of let the other young people know about my story, that my grandfather came to the San Juan Bautista there in about the 1915, but then he heard about the lettuce industry in about 1921, so he moved his family from there, San Juan, to Castroville, and then we was farming lettuce when the lettuce industry started here in Salinas. But you know, it's very tough years during the Depression, and unfortunately, my grandmother passed away in I think when 1935, I think it was. Well, 31, okay. And that's right. Lucky my family historian Francis is here, my cousin. And actually at that time, as Sandy Lodge said, you know, my grandfather, since he was not a citizen, he had dreams of returning back to Japan. But actually all the kids, you know, they didn't know nothing about Japan. So that time, we didn't want to, even though my Uncle George, who was the oldest at that time, going 16, he wanted to more or less, you know, stay here in America and all the other young siblings. So at that time, my grandfather was kind of heartbroken that his wife had passed away. At 16, my Uncle George took over the family farm. He's only a sophomore at Salinas High School. So he quit school and ran the farm, and then more or less my grandfather just retired and did social work here in the community. And then he actually passed away, I think, in 1936, I believe it was. And then, but then, luckily, my grandfather, it's kind of very unusual, like here in America, that, you know, my family was from Hiroshima, but then most of the other Japanese Americans were from Kyushu, southern Japan. So he's a little bit of an outcast, you know. But then meanwhile, there was this John Muther. He was a Swiss German, you know, which was kind of unusual too, because most of the other Swiss people in Switzerland were Swiss Italians. So they're both a little bit of an outcast. So they're both farming in the Blanco area. He had a dairy there, Mr. Muther. And I don't know, I got to know Mr. Muther in the 1960s, you know, very strong accent, very hard to understand. So I often wondered how my grandfather and him communicated. You know, not speaking English, and Mr. Muther's English was very bad, but they created a friendship, you know. And so, and after my grandfather passed away, and then my family was all interned to Poston, Arizona, I have to give Mr. Muther a lot of credit that, you know, every year in the wintertime, you know, he would, you know, drive us down to Poston, Arizona, and make sure our family was, you know, being taken care of well from the government. then, and more so since his son Frank was also in the military. He was actually captured in Bataan and was a prisoner of war in Japan. So, very unusual here. His son was a prisoner of war, but still, he thought of us as my family as his friend, and he's going to come every winter time to visit my family. So, and as you heard today, actually, it wasn't very pleasant to come back to Salinas after the war, so my family ended up going to Gilroy, settling in Gilroy, in 1946, and then actually there was 9 brothers and sisters at that time, and they just started off doing hoeing, thinning lettuce, picking tomatoes and prunes, but then the family just pooled all their money together, and after about 3 years in 1949, we were able to buy a small ranch in Aromas and started farming there, with a 20-acre. We were growing green onions and a little bit of lettuce at that time. And I remember both myself, my sister Bonnie's here, and my other cousins, my aunt, every summertime, we had to bunch onions. We'd be all together, all my aunts, and then later in the day, my uncle would pack the onions and ship it to the San Francisco market, and so, and then started growing head lettuce, and so a little 4-acre block of head lettuce, and then 1949, the Bud Antle, he came by and started buying our lettuce, and so that created a relationship with the Bud Antle company. So after a couple of years, he kept buying our lettuce. So, well, let's partner up. So I've been very fortunate to be partners with the Antle family since 1949. But then by sheer luck, my Uncle George still had a bank account here in Salinas. So I think it's 1951. He just had to be at the bank here in Salinas and just ran into Mr. Luther there. John John, was surprised to see Uncle George, and they started talking, and he found out we were in Aromas, and so he offered to, he moved down his ranch here in North Salinas, his dairy. He offered to have George come and grow lettuce on this ground in North Salinas. So we started farming. So Uncle George, about 1951, he moved back to Salinas and started growing head lettuce in Salinas, and then eventually my family moved back here in 1959, but from there we've been very fortunate that being with the Bud Antle company that we and Uncle George had the foresight to start buying ground, and from there we had enough ground that when Bud Antle was sold to Captain Cook, and when his son Bob, Bud had passed away, and Bob wanted to start a new company that we were able to form Tanamero and Antle in 1982, and with hard work by both families, we've become very successful at our business. So I hope you enjoyed my little story today.
All our special guests and their families, if you could join us for a photo. The supervisor could join us for a photo as well. And you said there's a representative from the San Bernardino County, James?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Where's Kurt?
Kurt?
Right here.
Yes, you could join us too, sir. And family members, want to join us too for a photo, please? And Sandra.
I don't represent anybody. Come here.
Please, everybody, as much as you can.
All right, 2 rows. 3 rows.
Okay, can I get everybody to look here?
Make sure I'm in the picture.
Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3. Take a couple more. 1, 2, 3. One, last one, quick flash.
rise and give them a round of applause, everyone. Okay, if we could just remain for a few more minutes, we have now some give opportunity to our supervisors to make some closing comments. Just want to give our colleagues an opportunity to say some words for this special occasion. And we can start with our supervisor from North County, Supervisor Jaffa.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate Supervisor Arroyo bringing this forward. As we mentioned, it's long overdue. It was a terrible time in our country, and the country. I remember my dad telling about during the war, his job was to go and make sure everybody had their windows blacked out because they were afraid of we were going to get bombed. And after the bombing in Pearl Harbor, we expected that the war would continue on to our coast. And when people are scared, they do some things that aren't right. And it was wrong from a humanitarian standpoint. Looking back and having been in the law, you look back about what a terrible, unconstitutional thing we did to so many of the Japanese American people. And I can only imagine having your life ripped up and being put in basically a concentration camp would do so. As you see from the story of the Tanamiras, though, there were a lot of, and you hear a lot of stories about some of the people who have been former friends and former businesses with the Japanese American people that saved their land for them and kind of welcome them back, and part of that leads to great businesses like the Tanamera Handle talked about. But this is long overdue, and so I'm glad to be a part of the Board of Supervisors that finally says we're sorry and we regret the great loss of the learning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for bringing this very important apology that's certainly long overdue. You know, just seeing those images were hurtful and painful to watch because it reminds me of history and things that have happened in history. I saw the image of my family, my dad and my brothers and his brothers who were repatriated back in the 30s when the government said you have 48 hours to get your belongings and go across the border to Mexico because we're going to seal that border. And even U.S. citizens, my uncles were citizens born in Texas, but yet they had to leave the country and then come back later, whether it's through the setup program, the guest worker program, and what he had to deal with. And so then our history goes back with Mr. Hashimoto, my teacher. Thank you for being here, and thank you for all you've done. I know to keep the history alive and to apologize for what you had to go through as a 6-year-old. I knew you as my teacher, and I knew the Japanese community in Watsonville, where I grew up in the Pajaro area. They were our employers. They were the growers that we worked for first when we came here in the 60s, and they treated us with respect. And I always remember that. You know, there's a way to get along. There's a way to have a relationship, whether you're the worker or the grower or the owner of the farm, and that was very important. And now to get to this point, and it is a wrong, and you have to right those wrongs. That is part of a peace builder. That is how you build a better community and a better society by owning up to it and saying it was wrong what was done to your community, and so we apologize for that. But also to keep doing what you said, Mr. Hashimoto, it's happening now again. And we have to stand together. We say it's not right when children, those dreamers can be taken from their families, and they're just taken by government action, and it's legal. But it's wrong. And I think the fact that we're doing this ought to send a message to all the high school students that are here from Salinas to understand that you have to stand up. You have to be willing to do what's tough sometimes, but to say it is not right to do this. And we will not let it happen again if we look back at history and look what has happened to the Japanese Americans again. For that, we apologize.
Thank you, Supervisor Salinas. Supervisor Adams.
Thank you, Supervisor Alejo. As I look at this beautiful audience, I just say that your forebears have suffered hardships that few of us could ever imagine. And the dignity and the grace and the forgiveness that you show us is deeply appreciated. The sorrow and the embarrassment that I think most of us feel at the wrongs of the people who perpetrated these things to you is absolutely sincere. And I simply want to reiterate what my colleagues, but more importantly what you have said, is that no matter what the subject, when you believe it is wrong, if you don't stand up and say no, who will? If not we, then whom? So again, on behalf of all of us, I'm so sorry, but I'm so very, very thankful at your graciousness and your forgiveness. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor. Supervisor Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate this presentation today. It's very, very moving and appropriate to make an official apology and try to put right this sad and painful wrong that was perpetrated. And I hope that we can show by a lifetime of our actions with all people. And we have many opportunities today and probably will into the future to really try to do as the plaque at the Salinas Rodeo Grounds says, may such injustice and humiliation never recur. It's up to us. We have to stand up and stand together. So thank you for this reminder today and the opportunity to be part of this apology.
Thank you, Supervisor Parker. In my last words, I just want to add that this moment today was very special to me. When I graduated from Watsonville High School in 1992, 5 Japanese Americans were finally able to walk across the stage with me 50 years after they were deprived of their high school graduation ceremony. That moment was forever ingrained in my mind and spurred me to learn more about what happened during this sad chapter of American history. I was aged with these high school students at that time. But I also later learned that many of our families shared similar experiences together, similar stories that Gary and Laura just shared. My grandparents came to the United States in the 1950s as migrant farm workers during the Bracero program, and first came to Watsonville in 1965. The first person to give my family a job was a Japanese American farmer named Roy Takamune. He not only gave my grandparents and their children jobs, he also gave them a housing and taught my grandfather how to be a sharecropper. 3 years later, they were both selling strawberries to Driscoll's in Watsonville. In 1978, a group of UC Santa Cruz students did an oral history project and interviewed my grandfather, Tomas Alejo. My grandfather said that Roy Takamune was the best man he ever met in his life in the United States. For me, that was a story of 2 immigrant families from 2 different parts of the world who helped each other realize their dreams and aspirations to give their family something better. And I sit here today because of those efforts and sacrifice. I want to thank all of you for coming here today, for joining us for this historic moment, and this will now conclude our special ceremony. We will break for 5 minutes to allow our special guests to depart from this meeting. Thank you.
Ok, Alejo, ¿de qué se trata esta resolución?
Hoy tuvimos una ceremonia especial para pedir perdón a la comunidad japonesa americana por acciones que tomaron a cabo aquí en Salinas en 1943. En ese tiempo arrestaron y pusieron en las prisiones a más de 3.500 familias japonesas americanas durante la Guerra Mundial II. Y en ese tiempo, la mesa de supervisores aquí del condado de Monterey tomaron acción para tomar una posición que dan libertad a esas familias. Fue una injusticia por esta mesa de supervisores y 75 años después estamos pidiendo perdón a la comunidad japonesa americana por esas acciones de esta mesa en ese tiempo.
Entonces piden perdón porque lo metieron a la cárcel. ¿Cuál fue la situación que hicieron? ¿Qué fue lo que hicieron?
Porque en ese tiempo el presidente Franklin Roosevelt ordenó que arrestaran y pusieron en 10 prisiones por todo el país a familias japonesas americanas, si eran ciudadanos o no, en estas prisiones. Y por casi 3 años no tenían su libertad, perdieron sus casas, sus negocios, sus propiedades. Era una injusticia muy grande en la historia de este país. A hoy, 75 años después, vimos que no se había pedido un perdón por las acciones de esta mesa y por eso hoy estamos agradecidos de tener esta ceremonia y también educar a la comunidad que durante tiempos difíciles que estamos viendo hoy en día es importante aprender de lo que pasó en el pasado. Ojalá que no se haga otra vez, pero vemos que hay mucho sentimiento en contra de inmigrantes que vemos hoy en día, pero esta historia de la comunidad japonesa americana nos debe de educar que no hay que repetir esas acciones del pasado.
¿Quiénes están invitados?